SABMiller is the world's second biggest brewer by volume and has a market cap of 789.3 billion rand. Headquartered in London, it has more than 200 beer brands in over 75 countries across 6 continents. The group is also one of the world's largest bottlers of Coca-Cola products. It trades on a price-to-earnings ratio of 30.5 and a dividend yield of 1.5%. Tell me that you didn't miss the boat on this one as well.
No, we haven't owned this one either, Bronwyn. I recall your interview in a much cooler place where you said, I think to Graham Mackay, you've been operating in Africa for 20 years, and he corrected you. He said, no, since 1895, because we seem to forget down here in South Africa that there's an Africa before the South. So I think
yes, he put me in my place.
He did, although I saw you put the president in his place, but that's another argument.
For another day.
For another day. Now, I think, interestingly, what's happened to this company is they've got a developing market multiple, even though they have strong developed market businesses. So people are happy to pay, because if you look at our continent and you say to yourself, where's the last big retail push globally? It undoubtedly has to be SABMiller. So I think that's why people are prepared to pay so much. Personally, gee, I don't know. I would tend to agree with people. And Africa, we're still early stages, and their purchases in China and India haven't quite worked out as they would have liked.
Daniel, has this been a good story for you and your clients?
Look, it's been a very good story for us, as you can see from the performance. I think it's a great global company, lots of exposure, lots of defensive exposure. Yes, it does have developed market exposure, but it does have a significant emerging market exposure as well. That does warrant a higher rating, which indeed it is trading at a bit of a higher rating than the global brewer average. I think that the outlook for the stock in terms of growing the earnings is a lot more defensive than quite a few other companies out there. They can still expand into certain areas. They can still move people up the premium ladder. So they graduate them from the lower cost, cheap entry beers to the more expensive beers. That creates pricing in and of itself. Their Foster's acquisition is turning around in Australia. And what's very interesting in the global brewer market is that we're reaching a bit of an end game in that you are seeing consolidation on a scale that you've never seen before. So guys are debating where the next step is going to be, and it has to be a massive step because the last few guys are all so big. And I think everyone in some way is sort of holding their breath and waiting to see where that's going to happen.
SABMiller at current levels, any enthusiasm, or now if you completely missed the boat, you're never going to get in?
No, interestingly, this one is held in the Hot Stocks portfolio. So it is one that we like as a global consumer play. Don't altogether partake in their product too much, and do think that in the coming years they'll...
There's a no drinking rule at Vestact, is there? Because
no,
Paul is very much of the same mindset.
So boring, Bronwyn, so boring. I do think one must have a look at their biggest shareholders, Altria. Now they own 27% odd. I want to know what they think in the long term, because they got this asset by, of course, doing the Miller swap. So that's where the Miller part comes from. Now in North America, people are, generally shifting towards drinking more premium than beer. So people will drink wine from, what's that place, Napa Valley in California, because that's more of a premium than beer. So I don't think people are downplaying. I also think they're quite innovative. You would have seen in Mozambique recently, that cassava beer, which I think has the same sort of payoff line as Castle, somewhat dry, somewhat bitter, but never sweet. I think it's the same, but in Portuguese. So there's a fair amount of innovation here, being able to capture a new market at much cheaper prices. So a Wall Street Journal article that I read on this Impala beer, which I think was the first beer I ever had, because I lived in Mozambique.
You see, he really doesn't like drinking, but he knows a lot about it, doesn't he?
I know a lot. You've got to know a lot about it. So I think a Wall Street Journal article pointed out that there was some guy in a northern state in Mozambique. He could now drink 6 beers instead of 3 because he could afford them. But the margins, ironically, were better for that beer for SABMiller.
Hot or not on SABMiller?
So similar to the previous stock, it's run up considerably. It's not cheap anymore, that's for sure. It still has very good defensive qualities. I prefer to wait for a pullback before we up our weighting in the stock. But so I'd say tentative hot. I'm hot on the story, hot on the company. Tentative on the price.
Sasha?
Yeah, I agree with all, except I'd say, you know, on the price, in these things you've got to be longer dated. So happy to hold, happy to still be hot.